This is Living Waters of Grace, the teaching ministry of Clark Lawfer, Senior Pastor of Calvary Chapel of Westmoreland County of Greensburg, Pennsylvania. Now here's Pastor Clark as he continues teaching through God's Word.
When we get to see heaven and we walk in and we see how awesome it is, immediately we're going to, all of us, suffer the loss of what we wish we could have done more when we were on the earth. But it's too late then. We'll say, man, I was so stupid, I wasted this, and look what I could have done that would have really impacted the kingdom. I think when we're there, God will reward us and show us people groups that are in the heavenly city because of the giving that each of us were part of while we were on earth.
All of us have had some form of buyer's remorse, whether it be a vehicle with less than stellar reliability or not wisely taking advantage of all the available time while on vacation. In today's message, Pastor Clark teaches that there's a chance that once you get to heaven, you might have a little buyer's remorse. It's not going to be about being with Jesus, because that will be the greatest thing you could ever experience. But for all the gospel conversations you didn't have. So reach them while you can. Now here's Pastor Clark in the book of James chapter 1 with today's edition of Living Waters of Grace.
Let the lowly brother glory in his exaltation, but the rich in his humiliation, because as a flower of the field, he will pass away. For no sooner has the sun risen with a burning heat than it withers the grass, its flowers falls, and its beautiful appearance perishes. So the rich man also will fade away in his pursuits. It's interesting that, John, you had mentioned this morning about our wealth and that kind of stuff. It gives a perspective here in James, as James is teaching, that if we are blessed with resources and wealth, that we need to use it for something that's going to last. Because it won't last on this earth forever, and certainly we don't last forever. Our lives are but a vapor, the Bible says. They appear for a little while and then vanisheth away. But it first starts with this lowly brother, and I think about the people that John was mentioning in Peru, these lowly citizens in this world who have nothing. They don't have any resources really to speak of. They don't have much wealth, and they don't have a lot to look at and say, wow, look what I've accumulated, or look what I've accomplished. Even if they had a desire to get something more in this world, they don't have the resources or the livelihood to be able to do that. So they're lowly brothers. And I think it tells us later on in the book of James that we're to humble ourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he might exalt us in due time. And I think about all these people in the world who are less fortunate than us, who don't have what we have. And they are lowly, and God will one day lift them up and reward them if they're his. They will have a mansion in the kingdom of heaven. All that they missed out in this life, when they see all that God has for them in eternity, won't compare to what they could have accomplished in this world. And so, in a way, it tells us in the scriptures, when we look at the issue of materialism and wealth, we should want the Lord to provide for us, not too much that we would forsake him or forget him, but not to have too little that we'd be tempted to steal. And I think in America, for the most part, even the most poor person is wealthy in comparison to the standards of the third world countries. And so we look at this issue of being rich. And we think about this time of year. I don't know about you, but the grass is starting to not look real good unless you water it and take care of it. It's just going to die. And so I'm out there early in the morning. I got the sprinkler on, trying to keep the grass green. It's almost like a battle that you're just not going to win. It's just been so dry, the drought this summer. But I remember in the spring how gorgeous everything was. I have this Scott's lawn service that comes around, and they put those chemicals into the grass, and man, it's lush. It looks like a golf course, and I'm like, man, look at my grass, isn't it cool, And then like a month or so later, when the sun comes out and it starts beating on it, it's like, you're wasting your money. Cindy says, you need to call them out here and tell them you're not happy with the result. And I said, well, it's because of the drought. What are you going to do? But that's the way it is in regard to the success of our lives and the wealth. You start to flourish and you accumulate and you have all this stuff. And then the sooner you start to, realize that this is not going to last. The heat of life and the pressures and the trials of life, they begin to beat on you and it begins to wither you. And just like the flower that can't sustain itself in the heat of drought, your life begins to not be real exciting anymore, because all that you have and all that you've accumulated, you look and you say, there's got to be more to life than this. And I think it's awesome whenever the Lord gets a hold of a wealthy person's life that they do have more maybe than a lot of other people. They start to analyze and they start to have a plan for the succession of their wealth in the days ahead. And maybe they commit to a certain mission board or a certain local church that they can trust that's going to funnel the resources that they give them for the purposes that are going to last long after their lives. And I think about the goodness of God, that if we do one day, by the grace of God, only by the grace of God, enter into that heavenly city, the kingdom, the Lord will remind us throughout eternity, as this world is still going on, that what you left behind is still paying dividends for the sake of the gospel. You set up an inheritance situation or an annuity type thing in a mission, and all of a sudden those resources, every year there's X number of dollars that are going to that place, and you're not even here anymore, So that's something to think about, because it's a waste just to live this life and at the end of it have nothing to show in eternity. I think of investments. We all like to see a good return on our investments, and that's important to be a good steward of what God gives you and trusts you with. But when we get to see heaven and we walk in and we see how awesome it is, immediately we're going to, all of us, suffer the loss of what we wish we could have done more when we were on the earth. But it's too late then. We'll say, man, I was so stupid, I wasted this, and look what I could have done that would have really impacted the kingdom. I think when we're there, God will reward us and show us people groups that are in the heavenly city because of the giving that each of us were part of while we were on earth. Even if it's small, it doesn't matter. It's whatever you can give with your heart by faith. And that old song, thank you for giving to the Lord. I was a life that was changed. Some far person there in Lima, or someone over there in Venezuela or Africa or wherever these places are that we're involved in, Asia, that you'll see these people in the kingdom, and the Lord will reward you because you were part of them actually having the opportunity to be there, because it takes the resources to get the missionaries and the Bibles and all the spiritual truth to these different third world countries. Someone has to foot the bill, right? If it isn't taken care of by the church, it doesn't get done. This doesn't get done. And Brian Weller, when he comes here, he's always really charged up, because he knows that the American church is very selfish. Less than 3%, I think he told me 1.5% of the budget in local churches goes to the missions. And we don't pat ourselves on the back here. I think it's because Cindy and I were involved in a mission organization. We first became Christians, that we committed from the first day that the church opened that we wanted this church to somehow, by the grace of God, be able to fund 20 to 30% of the budget for missions. And we've been able to do that ever since we've been open here, and we plan on continuing that. And we watch so that we don't do something and get outside the parameters of what we can afford in the budget, to drag you into a building program or some other building just for the sake of when God's timing is right, He'll make that clear. But we're just not going to do that to all of a sudden say, well, because we did that, now we got to cut back on our missions. And what's the point of even having a church then, when you can't really be focused on these kind of things that are going to last forever versus the stuff that will perish? And then he goes into verse 12 and he says, blessed is the man who endures temptation, for when he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life which the Lord has promised to those who love him. In Revelation chapter 2, Church of Smyrna, the Spirit spoke to that church regarding the trials that they were going to endure, imprisonment and that kind of stuff for the gospel's sake. And he reminded them that if they stayed faithful and they didn't give up and they just kept trusting God and they remained faithful to the end, they would receive this crown of life. And this crown is going to be something that all of us can have the privilege of wearing and actually being able to throw at the feet of Jesus in that last day when we stand before His throne. It's a reward for endurance. And the idea of enduring in temptation, how many of us were tempted this week? Raise your hand. All of us were. How many of us failed some temptations? All of us did. How many of us overcame some temptations? We all did, So it's this battle, of some days are better than others, But this idea of learning how to go through temptation, understanding the process of temptation. And all of us have a weakness. There's certain things that we're tempted with more than others. And there's certain areas in our lives that we have a tendency to be more unstable, I would say, than other areas. Some things you might not have a problem with, and that's great by the grace of God, but there might be some things that are really, really difficult for you. And those are the areas that the evil one will attack. He knows our vulnerability. He knows our weaknesses. And so how do we get through these times? Well, there is this benefit, this blessing of this crown if we endure. And I think one of the first things to understand in order to endure temptation is to first admit our weakness, to realize that we don't have the ability in ourselves to overcome our temptation, that we need the strength of God to overcome for us. And I think that honesty in our own heart before the Lord is what will begin the process of overcoming life. If I act like I don't have a problem and I ignore it, or I'm deceiving myself because I really like the temptation and I want to indulge in whatever it is that's tempting me, then I'm playing games and I'm going to fail all the time because I'm trying to get through that in my own strength and maybe I don't want help. But I believe that temptation, the more it beats you down, the more you get discouraged and the more you're frustrated you are, that eventually there is a time in your life where you get to the point you say, I've had it with this sin in my life. I don't want it to dominate me anymore. And that's different for all of us. Some of you might still be playing with certain types of sins in your life, and I encourage you just to be honest with God and say, Lord, this has got to go. And just because you say it's got to go doesn't mean it's going to go overnight. It's going to maybe still take some time, but the process of admitting to God and calling on the Lord for help will begin to start a process in your life of strength to look at the temptation and not buy into it right away. To start to look at it and say, I don't want this anymore. And God will eventually, in time, strengthen you and mature you so that the benefit of the temptation and the sin is not worth the sacrifice of what it does for you personally in your own mental health, your peacefulness, your purpose in life. Temptation is used by the evil one to destroy us. And so he tells us that we are to endure temptation. And I'm not going to act like I endure it all the time and tell you that I've got this all wrapped and I don't have any problem with falling into temptation. I think as we think of the Old Testament, I read those verses in Deuteronomy this morning in the 8th chapter. And the reason the Lord allowed these guys to go through these trials these 40 years was to humble them and to test them so that they would know what was in their heart. Now, God knows what's in our heart. He says our heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. There's nothing that ever surprises God when He looks into your heart and your failings and your struggles, and He never looks and says, oh man, I can't believe you're like that. You just sicken me. I mean, God knows everything from the end to the beginning to the end. So there is nothing that ever shocks Him in the sense of the behavior of His children. But I think what shocks is our response at times to really see what our hearts are like. I don't think it's a normal process for us to really want to know the way we really are. I think we like to sort of have this opinion of ourselves that's better than what we really are. All of us do. And you can find out what you're like when someone corrects you or makes a comment about you and how quickly you respond to justify your behavior, your actions. That usually shows that you don't want to deal with whatever it is a person's telling you about that you just don't want to admit. I guess the biggest area, in life for me is being a husband. Understanding my weaknesses in regard to loving my wife like Christ loves the church. That's something that I think every man, if you're honest with, you battle with, being sensitive and tender and open and considerate of your spouse. The Bible says the weaker vessel. I don't like it when my wife tells me I'm obnoxious. That doesn't make me feel good, or arrogant or proud or whatever. I don't like that. I want to try to twist it around so that I can make excuses for my shallowness. It never goes over real well. The Lord gets to me and deals with my heart. And I've been married 37 years this summer, and it's still a lesson I have to learn. And so we're wired and we're built in a way that we are prone to fall. The only saving grace, if you may, that prevents us from falling is the work of God's Spirit in our lives. So whenever you look at someone or you look at yourself and you say you're doing better in an area, you're not behaving the same way you used to, don't pat yourself on the back and think you're getting better. Just praise God and say, Christ is working in my life. He's changing me. And be encouraged, because that's what he promises he'll do. He will conform us to his image. And so it says in verse 13, let no one say when he is tempted, I'm tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. Now, when you look at that section in Deuteronomy, it says that the Lord tested those guys in the wilderness. That same word can be used for tempted. But the difference between what God does and what the devil does, the evil one is always tempting us for committing evil. God will not tempt us to commit evil. But he will try us and test us to see whether we will yield to the work of God's Spirit or will respond to the flesh. Now, responding in the energy of the flesh is something that comes natural to us. Since you were born a baby and you grew up, you have a certain way about you, all of us do, that whenever a crisis or a trial or a situation or something happens that you don't like, you respond in a way of saving your own skin. It's survival of your own instinct that you would not ever look bad. And so you fight against anything that will take control out of your own hands. And so God has to constantly try us and break us down and humble us so that finally, like you just say, and I don't know about you, but there's some Sundays in here that, like there's a certain area in my life or something I'm struggling with, I finally just have to say, God, I can't change this. I got to give this up to you. I got to really surrender this to your will, and I just got to admit it that I got a problem here. And so it's in the idea of the surrender, and until we're willing to surrender, we don't get through these temptations. We keep failing them because we're trying to do it in our own strength, or we're just blowing God off. And so God, as he tested those guys in the wilderness, the children of Israel, he'll try you in your own life. I don't know what it might be. Something in your own conscience, your mind. It's like, how do you think? Do you think with your heart or do you think with your mind? If you think with your heart, you begin to see life the way God sees it. If you're only thinking with your mind, you close your heart down and you justify and you rationalize your behavior, because the mind has a way of twisting things. It's just real good at manipulation. But the heart, if your heart's really open to seeing yourself as you are, that's when some progress can happen. And the Bible tells us that our heart is deceitful above all things, and it's desperately wicked. And that's something we all have to come to the realization of. Don't sit here for a minute and think that you got a good heart. You got a new heart if God has saved you. He's given you a heart of flesh that is after his nature, but you still fight with the fallen Adamic nature that is always constantly trying to control the life. And so this heart, is prone to be distorted in the sense of how it hears the truth. And so what's the application in your own life? Well, ask someone who really loves you and knows you to point out to you something that you need to know about in your life, something that you need to consider or be open to. Let someone be there to share with you what it is that needs to be changed in your life, because you can't see it usually yourself. David said, "Search me, O God, know my heart, and try me and know my thoughts, and see if there's any wicked way in me." And he's given God permission, saying, "Lord, I want you to search my heart, because whenever I search it, I'm only trying to find good stuff all the time, and pat myself on the back. If there's something bad there, I don't want to have to really face that. I mean, that's our human nature, right? That's our pride. We want to, always demand that we're right and that everyone else is wrong, and That's a dilemma. And so he says, when you're tempted, don't say you're tempted by God in the sense of this issue, that God can't be tempted by evil, or he does not himself tempt anyone with this sense that I'm going to cause you to be moved into a situation of committing evil. God can't do that. He wouldn't do that. That's not in his sovereign character and his decree. He's not, no one made God. God is self-existing. He always was, and he never changes. It says in Malachi chapter 3 that the Lord, he is always the same. But in the sense of the temptation, we got to realize that there is this dark side of life, and the devil is in that domain, and his whole intention is to cause you to be enticed, it says here. Tempted when you are drawn away by your own desires and enticed. So the devil works with material that's already there in the heart. Every one of us has the capacity to commit any sin in the Bible. And the material is there because it's called sin. It's part of the fallenness. So if you're playing around with an area in your life and maybe you really haven't crossed the line, so to speak, into where it can eventually get you, but you're getting close to it. The devil knows that, and he's patient. He just like entices. He draws you more and more into getting your value system down and your convictions and getting you to forsake integrity so that you keep making excuses little by little to move into what is really down deep inside, turning you on, so to speak. And so you're drawn to it. You're being enticed. It's very attractive. It's very alluring. You think of David and his sin with Bathsheba. David's a man after God's own heart, a righteous man. He's held up in the scriptures even after the horrible things he did as a man who loved God. But there was a period in his life, for whatever reason, he was messing around. He was making little compromises. The temptations were there. He had a weakness, and it was, as most men do, the eye gate and the physical attraction of the female form. And so how many days did he look and just briefly look and lust and think and, just have ungodly thoughts in his heart when he looked upon women? And this so happened that he was at that point that one night, hot night, the moon was out, probably a romantic night. His lust was high, his desires were strong. He really was in the mood or whatever, and he just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. It was a setup by the evil one. And if he was walking close with the Lord at the time and guarding his heart and wanting to overcome temptation, he would have understood that this weakness is in his life and he can't give it an inch, because if he does, it's going to be a problem. And so he would have known, I'm not going up on the roof of the house late at night, because that's when a lot of women take their baths on the deck of their own homes, and that's just not a place you want to go. And it's like us guys, you got to know where you can go and where you can't go, what you can look at and what you can't look at. And if you play around with looking at some things you shouldn't look at, you're going to get burnt. You just do. And the evil one knows how to lock us up and to put us into bondage and entice us. And, Billy Graham said one time that there's nothing wrong with seeing a beautiful woman and saying, she's very pretty. The problem is when you take the second look and the third look. And then you start doing what you do in your mind. And I don't have to get graphic there, but you guys know what I'm talking about. And some women have this struggle as well. More so men with the eye gate. Women are more in the emotional state of feeling and the romance and that kind of thing. But nonetheless, we are tempted when we're drawn away by our own desires and enticed. We can't blame. Remember the old Flip Wilson? A lot of you are too young to realize that, but he always said, the devil made me do it. It was always the devil. And, it isn't the devil. We can't blame him. Yeah, he's partner in the crime in the sense of setting everything up, but it's our own desire that causes us to fall into whatever we want to fall into.
We couldn't have asked for better company during today's broadcast of Living Waters of Grace. Thank you for listening. We trust that this time of study in the New Testament has been more fulfilling than you imagined and has reached beyond any expectation you might have had. Did you know that God's Word is unchanging and applicable in every situation we face? We see this truth in the book of James, where Pastor Clark has been teaching us how to live out our faith in practical ways. James challenges us to put our faith into action through works that reflect our love for Christ. It's easy to talk about our faith, but the real question is, are we living it? James calls us to be doers of the Word, not just hearers. So, Do your actions line up with your faith? If not, remember, God gives wisdom and strength to those who ask. Do you desire a deeper, more authentic walk with Jesus? We encourage you to visit CalvaryChapelOnline.com, where you'll find helpful resources to guide you. While you're there, get familiar with Calvary Chapel Westmoreland, the home base of this radio ministry. Also, be sure to download our mobile app so you never miss a broadcast. If you're outside the area, you can still join us by subscribing to our YouTube channel. All the details can be found on our website, CalvaryChapelOnline.com. Well, we're out of time for now, but thank you for listening today to Living Waters of Grace. If you're in the Greensburg area, you can listen to Grace FM on the new 91.7 frequency. Be sure to join us again next time for more biblical insights and practical wisdom from the book of James, right here on Living Waters of Grace.